feel isolated cameras off.
It's exhausting just having a camera on all the time. Like you get meant to look into it. I actually started putting my camera to the side, so I'm looking at my screen, so it feels more honest.
I think that cameras are a burden, especially if you have, self-confidence issues, which I have.
You do?
Okay. We're going to get into that at the end of the episode, aren't we, Brian?
Yes, let's get started. I have done a podcast from Sicily before. I did it last year. And I don't know, this is a different property, so maybe that's it. Bear with me.
You travel a lot. This is turning into a little bit of the all-in.
Yeah, no, I'm Euromaxing.
Yeah.
That's, my wife is European. She likes to come back to Europe every summer. And I say, sure, why not? So we are in Sicily for the next week, and then we're going to Croatia and Serbia. So
that's lovely.
A lot of Euro time in front of me. But I'm here. I have bad Wi-Fi, but that's okay. Sicily does a lot of other things really well. I won't dwell on them too much.
Are there any big AI companies headquartered in Sicily?
Literally nobody has mentioned compute so far in Sicily at all.
That must be nice. It's nice.
Yeah.
The Agadi Islands are not really tuned in to the AI story just yet, but they'll get there. All right. Welcome to People vs. Algorithms, show about detecting patterns, media technology, culture, and other topics. Joined by Troy Young. We're going to be talking about mental health a little bit, I guess, and by Alex Schleifer. Guys, welcome. Hope your summers are going well. After today, I'm gonna go fully into vacation mode for at least a week.
Awesome. Wow. So that's not even vacation mode you're in right now. This is just you on an island. It's just warm up.
I'm working right now.
Well, you are. Yeah. They live work.
Yeah, I mean, it's work. It's work. It counts these days. We got some feedback on the podcast. I think we should address it.
Let's hit it.
It was from, because I want to talk a little bit about feedback. I didn't prepare you guys for this.
I mean, we always get feedback, but sometimes it touches a nerve.
Well, it's anonymous feedback. I got a little prickly because that's one of my bad traits. Don't agree. It's fine. I bristled.
It's a sign of a struggling ego.
Okay, maybe, because feedback is tough. Troy, what was the feedback? How would you characterize? There was a few points.
Well, it was like your show is getting worse. There's all this events nonsense you talked about, which I kind of been sympathetic to. This Alex Hartsock thing is
this person was a guy. Well, this person was a guy, and they took a shot at me, like doing some light promotion.
Oh, also the newsletter sucks. Get back to work, Troy, on the newsletter because it's not good enough. Which and all I sent back to him is 2 words. I agree. I didn't go any deeper than that.
Wow.
Okay. Well, we love feedback.
No, but it did force a conversation, guys. The positive was it forced a conversation, a good one, around what is it that we're doing, and every now and then we have these kind of spasmodic moments where we try to figure out whether this is a hobby or how it gets better. Is it a business? Why isn't Brian turning it into a business? And I think in this case,
why am I still doing this?
Why am I doing this? And it forced the question, which is like, what is it about? What is People versus Algorithms about? And when are we at our best? And what I had said is like, I'm less interested in kind of media mechanics and how you shift from ad revenue to event revenue and stuff like that. And I'm more interested in this kind of broader remit, which is we look for interesting things in this pastiche of influences that we uniquely bring together in this podcast. And we look for weird things and we look for intersectionality. And we like that Alex is here because he's a creative thinker and a smart guy and lives in a slightly different world. And Brian is the smartest one on the podcast, and I can be provocative. I'm not handsome, but I'm provocative maybe.
We're like a K-pop band.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
I don't know where we landed.
The objection. Well, I don't know why he took a shot at my promotion though, because I mean that really.
Well, but I have a point on that. You
Like,
saved the
Brian left the
promotion
fucking
to.
country after
Wait,
that's
you didn't let me
No, no.
finish, Troy.
Okay, sorry.
I didn't like the fact that he, and I know it's a he, that he took a shot at my promotion of TRB Audience Summit on September 17th at the People Lead Public Store.
Yeah, but I was thinking that we could relegate the promotional thing to a kind of express, like a segment at the end of the podcast. In the broader universe, we are, here are the things that we're up to. And that way we can just kind of put it in its spot, as opposed to you trying to slide it in every couple of minutes on the main show.
It probably converts better the way Brian does it now. It's just, it's
It's guerrilla marketing. Yeah. Okay. Well, fine. We'll see. I might work in a pitch or two for the TRB Audience Summit, September 17th.
What does TRB stand for again?
Well, I'm trying to shorten it because I didn't really think a lot about the naming part. I don't know if brands matter anymore. Does the name really matter?
I don't know if it does or doesn't, but I don't know if you've noticed, but a lot of the new generation of pop artists and rappers have these names that obviously come from like internet usernames. Lots of people with numbers in them and misspelled things. I think we've just run out of names. So, TRB is fine. I think everything goes now. Everything goes.
Mine was a broader point. Like, do names matter as much in branding of companies as it used to? Is that same really with logos? I've noticed just everyone is making logos with Claude, and I think maybe logos become more important because everything is just being fed into these machines to spit out.
It matters more than ever, man. People will start. The stuff that Claude can generate is really good, but you're starting to see a lot of stuff that looks exactly the same. And a brand has always been about standing out. And a brand is not just the logo or the font or whatever. It's what you do with it. And standing out is and will become more important than ever, I think, because before it could be, you could stand out just by getting something done by people who are good at it. And that mode is gone now. So, with the destruction of moats, you need to get,
Have you noticed that websites are all better designed now, though? Sort of from a Web 2.0 point of view, technically they're better. There's every website that particularly commercial ones are kind of good now because AI does them so well. So the next thing has got to be to make them look shitty.
Oh, I mean, a bit. There's a movement towards that. I mean, there's a movement towards that in music. This. We talked about him on the pod before, but folks like McGee, I think that's how you say it, right? You make it sound like you recorded it in the bathroom. Sounds raw. Sounds real. Doesn't look like anything. I think Angine de Poitrine, I don't know if you've heard those guys. It's like super weird. Everybody is just trying to stand up. That's what you need to do.
Do you ever listen to that band for pleasure, other than just sort of listening for interest or novelty?
Yeah,
because I think they're really an interesting band, but they're unlistenable.
No, I like this stuff. I like a band called Dawn of Meaty. It makes my brain tickle. I like it.
Well, what's making your brain tickle, Brian?
Let's get into meaty. Let's do this. Let's do the open and closed AI debate. I think this is a phony war. I don't know if you guys remember the phony war before.
Explain the war.
But this is a phony war of, is it going to be open? Is it going to be closed? And I think the real story is Dario Omadai. A hit got put out on this guy. This is, Bill Simmons has Conspiracy Bill. I want to do Conspiracy Brian, because Conspiracy Brian believes that there's a group chat because the world is run by cabals, and the Silicon Valley / DOD group chat said, we got to take this guy out. Yeah. And everyone's gunning for Anthropic, and they're using, they're going to be hoist on their own petard. They came out with that safety message, and it's being used against them. It was great for attracting researchers. It was great for, businesses, B2B business. And now they're going to be hoist on the petard of distillation. One of the big debates is whether we should allow, the government should somehow try to crack down on the distillation being done by Chinese labs. And the Chinese labs are taking the output of both, ChatGPT and Claude, and they're training their own models on this. And obviously, it's very similar to what these LLMs did with the world's creative output. But I think in the background,
didn't they train their own
single Silicon
factories
Valley
on it
leader-
with Apple? Hasn't that been part of the game all along? Just do it better.
A few things happen in sequence here, right? A Chinese model comes out that's using open weights. We were not going to get into the technical reason, right? Open weights, open source is just, it wasn't released in open source at that time, but it's a Chinese model came out. It looks like it's catching up with the big models from ChatGPT and Anthropic. People start freaking out. The problem is that the Chinese companies are able to use Anthropic's and OpenAI's LLMs to train their models because they don't have to follow the rules. Meanwhile, the US companies are crippled and cannot use these models to train their own open source models because OpenAI and Anthropic it was okay for them to steal the entire internet. But if anybody uses their LLM to train an LLM, that's wrong. And there was a little bit of a kerfuffle around that. Then Jensen Huang from NVIDIA releases a letter saying we should have open weights, and it gets signed by everybody from, Andreessen Horowitz to, I think then Google started joining it and Microsoft, of course. A lot of the people losing the AI battle, or people who will benefit if there are more open weights and open source LLMs like NVIDIA. The only people who haven't signed it are Anthropic and Apple. Anthropic for various reasons, because I think a lot of people who've joined this list are just piling on Anthropic because they're winning and nobody likes a winner. And then the other company that's missing is Apple, because Apple doesn't need to do this shit and is just going to stay away and be fine. And so here's where we are. I think it would be great if we had more open weight models. I think this is where it's all going, and I think it's why these companies are super overvalued.
Let me build on this a little bit. So clearly everybody's acting in their own interests. It should come as no surprise. Yeah. Secondly, this feels like schoolyard shit. Like they're going to bully this nerd, and
they're all nerds. That's the.
But this is nerd on nerd shit. And then the other one that I love, the great irony of billionaires complaining about power concentration. And this is suddenly the new the biggest issue that we have to focus on. And then,
but doesn't it seem like the narrative just all shifted and everyone moved in lockstep? Like again, I'm in conspiracy mode here, but did they all of a sudden recognize this? Seems unusual.
Oh, it was an opening, right? I mean, it's entirely opportunistic where, Jensen Huang has nothing to lose by saying we should have open weights. It's going to be, publicly supported. It's going to sell more chips, and everybody piled on. I think that's why I don't think it was entirely organized. I think it's just, people freaked out because the Chinese stuff is going to make the markets, it's going to hurt the market.
I think it's interesting to single out the interesting parts of the characters in this narrative. First of all, I think most of it was started by David Sachs. And I think that his deep, deep, deep disdain for Dario cannot be hidden. It comes out constantly. Yeah. And I think that
he's not going on that show.
He turned like safety into this partisan issue, and
failed miserably at whatever he was trying to do, being crypto czar and AI czar. None of this stuff got stuck. So
I mean, I think he succeeded wildly at becoming more important and more influential.
For a minute, it's all
to this day, I think. And so I think that David's role in this is interesting, and I think that what Sam does now is kind of interesting. He was on the Invest Like the Best podcast this week, and I think it was like he did a masterful job of being kind of calm, considered, super articulate about the role of frontier players in an ecosystem that includes open weight models, and talking about
they signed that letter, right? And
they did sign the letter, correct?
To sign that letter for them.
The biggest question is like for the capital accumulation around these two companies in particular, Anthropic and OpenAI is what happens when the core model is commoditized, and how much progress you can make in building a moat around your company through scale of compute, through brand, through harness, through unique data sets, through penetration into corporations and habit, and how big a company can they become by taking the leadership position with the model and the proximity to that model to build applications and turning that into a business that is wildly valuable. And it's the sort of industrial drama of our time. It's a really interesting.
Well, I'm interested in the drama. I don't know about if open weights. I'm not going to weigh in on the open weights, but I know drama, and I'm wondering what is behind the drama. We've got different characters. Like you said, Sam Altman went back into the lab. He's been at the gym with the TBPN guys, and he came back, and he's really buff. He's a lot better. I think this TBPN acquisition turned out to be a good idea.
I mean, is he physically buff? I try to avoid Sam Altman and find him grating.
No, I just mean in an information kind
He's information buff.
way.
I mean, I think it's, Ben Thompson who said that OpenAI works a lot better when they're the loser, when they're the underdog, when they're the ones kind of finding the battle, and it kind of them fighting against Anthropic being, the behemoth here is a better look for OpenAI. They operate better like that because I think Sam Altman operates better like that. It gives them a reason to be aggressive, and when they're winning, I think I get a sense that that part of what's happening. I don't know. I mean, I think the drama is real, but everybody's piling on to the winner. I think Anthropic isn't particularly playing nice with everyone because they don't have to. You can see the neutral players here, right? Like emerging NVIDIA, Apple, they're doing all sorts of political machinations that are all self-serving. So it's really interesting. There are no friends in this business.
Well, that's the part. So it's it's a high school cafeteria situation. And Dario is sitting at his own table. It seems like it's a nice table. It's a big table. He's a rich kid now. But okay, Sam got booted out from Apple's table, right? And you have
they really dislike each other now. Apple and OpenAI are not friends, even though.
So what are the stakes of this informational battle that's going on here? Because this is not happening behind the scenes, right? I mean, open letters. I mean, this is an ad, right? So what is at stake here, and who are they advertising to? Regulators?
I think
they're advertising to Trump.
Yeah, I think they're talking to regulators.
And I think now the majority of the power brokers in Silicon Valley want the government not to block open models from China. And I think that's what will happen. And I think we'll see a lot of competition, at the LLM, at the model level. And I think it's going to be good. I think it's all good.
I think it goes beyond that, though. I think, and when they're targeting Anthropic, and we can move on from that topic because it gets maybe boring. But the reason they might be targeting Anthropic is because everybody's losing to Anthropic at this stage. If the battlefield remains the same, if the playfield remains the same, and everybody's kind of behind. I mean, OpenAI is kind of close to it, but I don't think they're catching up on the coding side yet. And I think what people might want to do is force the hand of the government to force these LLM companies to open up their weights, open up their LLMs, and allow other companies to build open source LLMs by using distillation, which is kind of using the LLM to teach other LLMs, just to compete with China. And the entire field either benefits from it directly or indirectly. So they benefit from it because if you're a company that's spending a bunch of money and you don't really have a play, it's great because you just really want to sell enterprise solutions. So that's why the only loser really at this stage is Anthropic. But since OpenAI is already losing, I think that it's just that's the play right now.
Wouldn't you agree though, Brian, that there's massive second order effects to this high school drama? So many fortunes are connected to the success of Anthropic and OpenAI. maybe the market could handle that gut punch if they both, imploded. But, the downstream impacts would hit companies like Oracle, which would then hit the battle between Paramount and Warner. So many people are obviously invested in NVIDIA. The only thing that's propping up the economy and I think, good jobs for lots of working people is all the data center construction and the build out. So like, this is the sort of center of a kind of shift in the economy that would just have massive second order effects.
I mean, totally. And they're clearly angling for, to make Anthropic the bad guy. And I just wonder if they'll, I think Anthropic did a really good marketing job with positioning themselves from the first part of this story. And now it's changed and, the game changes. And that's why I think Dario Almadai is an interesting character, and how he adapts to this phase of the game is going to be fascinating. So
in the whole AI slop fruit people kind of universe, Dario's always a pear. His head is a pear.
Oh, yeah, he doesn't pear-shaped head.
They make him a pear.
Is there like an AI show that you watch?
It hits my feed sometimes, and Dario's a pear. Oh, and Sam is an orange, I think.
Wow. Okay.
Or peach, maybe he's a peach.
This is an imperfect segue, but I have a feature request for PVA Field Notes. You've made some changes to it, and one of the changes that I really like is the in the room. So when you go to pvanotes.com, you can see who is in the room. Kyle's in the room right now. Maurice is in the room.
Hey, Maurice.
Linda's
in the room. Linda's always in the room.
That's an HR name, and Linda is the HR director. Can you tell people who Linda is?
Well, I kept Linda quiet for a little while, and it was funny because I would get notes from people saying, "Who the fuck is Linda?"
Yes, so did I.
And Linda,
Anna asked me. She goes, "Who is Linda?"
Yeah, and Linda had a picture of Joan Baez I used a picture of Joan Baez with Bob Dylan from 1965, and so that was Linda. I don't know why I came up with the name Linda, other than it was the first thing that came to my mind, and I thought it was funny. Linda was designed to be an agent inside of our little Field Notes community, to be a helpful person. So to be helpful with onboarding for new folks, to be someone that picks through, the world of interesting posts on X and Reddit and brings those back to us. A person that goes out and finds our favorite podcasts and summarizes them for us dutifully in the feed. And also someone that could answer questions for folks inside of a post. So if you wanted an article summarized or you wanted to, get additional information, you could, inside of the comments, say, "At Linda, what's going on here?" And Linda will go out and do your work for you. So that's Linda. She participates in the community as just another personality. She's labeled an AI now because people thought that was disingenuous to not do that. And so, yeah, Linda's here. And it's really interesting, I think, more broadly. I think you're seeing a lot of this now. We spoke about this last week, but there's the new sort of Slack competitor from Jack Dorsey called Buzz. And Buzz is, I think, designed for largely a technical and program or project management or product management function that connects your conversation and all your workflows to like GitHub. And so it's like Slack for technical people, but bots are a fundamental part of the construct to help you organize your projects and work more efficiently. So it's a kind of bot first or AI first Slack competitor. You're seeing it in Dan Gardner from Code and Theory, his company. It's called Domain, on domain.ai, and the bot's called Doma. Interesting company. Agents that you can put in any environment where you're working with your colleagues, and the agents become helpful to what you're doing. And obviously, if you use Slack, you'll notice that they've got all kinds of crazy agent or AI integration. So like, having these, types of participants in group or kind of social, particularly business environments is a big theme in software right now.
Well, two things with that. Three. One is there's clearly a move afoot to try to figure out how we deal with human agent interactions. I mean, right now the agents are hanging out with themselves and the humans are by themselves, and they need to interact more. So I'm in favor of that. I welcome Linda. Two is very interesting that Linda's personality is kind of not to have a personality. And at first I was like, yeah, she's really by the books, but I think it's actually better. I've come around to thinking it's better that Linda does not try too hard to have a human personality.
I agree. I mean, I think when I set up agents, you can kind of set up personalities. The first thing I like to do is dial it way down. I think there's something just like uncanny valley about that, and I feel like it wastes time. So I'm here for it. You also want you also want somebody that's competent and doesn't have to showboat. It's kind of nice. People are so attention seeking,
Can we talk about media for a little bit?
Sure.
Can we? I know it's sad, right?
I really want an answer to that question that I posed to you earlier, Brian.
What?
Around media.
Oh, well, that's what we're dealing with, Troy. What is your question? You can introduce this topic because you actually wrote the topic in field notes.
Yes.
I can read it if you want, Troy.
Okay.
Yeah. Confusingly, field notes is on pvanotes.com. We're going to fix all that. We're going to fix all that.
Okay. Yeah. Well, where I'll introduce it, Brian, because it started for me today when I think I was reading Feed Me, Emily's newsletter, and there was this insurance company called Corgi that was opening cafes in New York, Atlanta, San Francisco, I think Los Angeles. And I was like, that's where we are, where to be creative in marketing as an insurance company targeted to startups and founders and early stage companies, you have to do really unconventional things to market your company, like opening up cafes and naming the drinks after your clients. And I put it on.
Is that a real thing?
I put it on field notes. Yeah, it's in there. If you go down.
Oh yeah, Corgi's everywhere.
Yeah, and so then I looked up Corgi, and it's a company that came out of Y Combinator that's claiming to kind of reinvent the business insurance category from top to bottom. They have a bus service in San Francisco. They have all these cafes. Like, this is going way beyond funny swag like Palantir, right? And I was like, what's going on in media? Like, how does that connect to what we talk about all the time? And I think what it said to me is there was this idea that you had to be all in, that you had to be an expert, that you had to be, completely focused to be good at media. You had to be a professional. And we looked at companies really skeptically that dabbled, whether that was Robinhood's experiment in media or,
Cash App,
Cash App doing crazy stuff for sure, or Chase owning the infatuation, which has gotten better since they owned it, interestingly. Or even like guys like our politicians like Mamdani being so good at social media, like conceptually. Today, him and Lena Khan, like doing those Chinese finger traps, talking about not being able to unsubscribe from stuff. And like just a simple concept for a social media video, like they're good at it, right? Or, YouTube as this collection of the commons beating Netflix, or creators building big media companies when we said that it would never happen, or Alex building a gaming company, but being completely fixated in chapter 1 with being gaming media, essentially. And then, contrasting that with the headline of the Daily Beast, presumably having a hard time, although they say that they've made it profitable, but suddenly the business is for sale and IAC or People Inc. or whatever is going to take it out. Now, is that them not wanting to be in the news business? Is that it's too much of a headache? I'm not sure. And I was just like, what has changed besides it just being easier for anybody to make stuff, or necessary to make stuff because you don't have systematic access to audiences anymore? And how really, upon reflection, that content marketing just won everything. Like, everything is content marketing now. And kind of what happens next? Like, where does the industry find any kind of equilibrium? And that was, I guess, my long-winded setup to the question.
My thing with that is I think it proves that media, and I think this was a discovery broadly, that media is a completely underpriced asset. It's just the mechanisms of making money by the media industry are irretrievably broken. Their distribution model is broken. Their monetization model is broken. I mean, the idea that subscriptions are a success when 95% of your audience will never do it is kind of crazy. But media itself has tremendous leverage. Trump proved that. Mamdani is proving that. And then you see it beyond politics. I don't think the sort of go direct method goes anywhere. I mean, look at this week. Bernard Arnault came back and clapped back, I guess, as they say, at a Le Monde, like 6-part investigation. It was over months. They threw a ton of people at it. He joined X, which still matters possibly more than when Elon bought it. Sorry, Alex.
Oh, come on.
He joined X. This is an age of open letters. It was like, it was nicely done. He didn't refute any of the stuff that they dug up. But this is yet another sign that media itself, professional media, has completely lost to UGC, to practitioner media, to everyone else figuring out that, holy shit, there's a lot of leverage in being able to not just influence media, but control it. And not just control it from the back, but just make our own media. To me, I think that's exciting. And I think that's actually what the podcast is about, actually. I think that's the answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why does that make you feel, Troy?
It makes me feel a couple things, and they're a bit disconnected. When I think of this podcast, I think about me walking to the Hearst Tower, and on the way there, I was preparing for my leadership meeting every Friday. And I would walk to the tower, and I would be like, holy shit, I haven't done any preparation. What am I going to talk about today? And I would always find something that was like a little bit disconnected from our day-to-day that was a good sort of opening gambit in talking about where we were as a company and how we had to think differently about what our role was as a company, because it was a time of deep existential change. And I thought this podcast is about that. It's about looking at all the things in the world and that we see and trying to connect them in ways that are unconventional. Let's let people know that Riverside is the application we use to manage the podcast. And when you have one person with a wildly unstable connection in Sicily, sometimes you get unexpected results. So we've been struggling mightily today with Brian's connection, although I hope he's enjoying his time in Sicily.
Yeah, we'll miss him dearly.
The one thing that I tried to bring up with Brian, and you'll have a take on it as well, so I'll try to articulate it one more time. Yeah. But it's just, I see the internet that we worked hard to create just getting so terrible that it's unusable. And I don't think that that's just kind of the hyperbole of some kind of critic or naysayer. It's like, the ad experience is clearly not working and it is broken. And so people resort to all kinds of nefarious, acts with advertising on web pages. But more importantly, like the world wanted subscription revenue. And that was a noble goal. The truth is not a lot of publications can sustain it on account of having, the focus, the quality, and all of that. And there's a lot of lifestyle publications or publications that maybe occupy a little part in your life, but not a significant one, that just don't have that proposition. So what you get is we paywalled everything. Mm-hmm. And if you contrast that to where we came from, before content found audiences, even if the incentives and platform dependencies were imperfect. So when BuzzFeed created content or when Business Insider created content, they got the benefit of that. And they had ad model that supported that kind of content creation, and they had a distribution model that allowed them to get the scale to make that work. So now what we get is everybody has a paywall. It just made the internet incredibly frustrating and more friction filled, and for me, way less useful. And it's just that there's tons of publications I'm never going to subscribe to. I'm not going to subscribe to The Verge. It's not that The Verge is, inherently bad. It's just not important enough to me, right? So what happens? These pubs, they lose readers, they lose influence. The people that make the content make it for a very small number of people. The internet gets worse. And I'm not sure that on the other side of it, they find a robust subscription-led business. And I do realize the pickle where, certainly in this model, without the scale of a distribution partner, the ads aren't going to save these businesses. So what you get is now the whole thing feels massively misaligned. And I liked it better before.
Yeah, we're all mourning something.
It's a conundrum. There's no bundling that seems to be on the horizon. Yeah, you could use Apple News, but Apple News is this like kind of terrible walled garden. Micropayments is not even something people talk about anymore. And so here we are. Sucks.
The internet is turning into a wasteland because both the ways of consuming and creating content for the internet are kind of being chomped up by AI, right? So you're actually getting more content, more fake traffic, but yet people are actually clicking on links yet less. I'm sad, I'm also grieving the old internet. I went onto a GeoCities cache yesterday to get a sense of the old internet and look at it on my giant screen. And it was fun, and it was fun for a long time. And we had lots of good stuff. But I also am angry because I think there was like a lot of mismanagement, right? I do think that the economics, you said maybe they were, imperfect, but pre-AI, the internet started turning to shit to the point where, pre-AI people started looking on Reddit, for answers. And, kind of the social media walled garden where, Instagram wouldn't even share links or anything that you post on a social media feed with a link would get downvoted, those decisions. And then the owners of the media company, I mean, very smart guy, very talented, obviously. But when we spoke to Neil Fogel and I was mentioning these things or what was coming and as a potential risk, he laughed it off and was pretty sure people would still go and check out his recipes. When asked if, Google's changes would hurt the internet, Sundar Pichai said, like, they're getting more click-throughs than ever. They're sending more traffic than ever to people. And all that stuff is obviously wrong. It was obviously happening, and maybe it's inevitable, but I also feel like people didn't take it seriously. We let it happen to us, and it started before the internet, And
and then, when you reflect on it, Alex, I mean, there's some truths here. First of all, I would say it's not that advertising doesn't work on the internet, because the sort of three types of advertising work great on platforms. So lifestyle ads that are tuned to your interests work great on Instagram. Video ads work great on YouTube. And high intent performance advertising works great on Google.
Yeah.
And so what it meant is you couldn't have a bunch of players all trying to do their own things. Platforms obviously won. Sort of the hope of kind of independent product innovation is, kind of in many ways futile. You have to live in these environments, and they're the new kind of infrastructure, and media companies that want to do things independently on the internet, like the success stories are the exception. So it's kind of funny. It's not that advertising didn't work. It's that the internet kind of forces a new type of aggregator that media companies couldn't become.
And I think, honestly, like, I don't know if it's all bad. I still find a lot of joy to be found on YouTube. I think YouTube remains.
Oh, it's not all bad at all, actually.
Yeah.
There's lots of joy on YouTube for me personally. There's lots of joy on Instagram and on Reddit.
On Reddit. I think what we're building with PVA, I think the same way kind of chat rooms have a space in people's heart, like there's still opportunity to build capabilities into your media platform. We won't sell ad against it. Maybe if this turns into a business, the core driver for the ads is going to be the media the kind of the podcast and the YouTube stuff. And then, like all of the other stuff that exists on the internet is value add, it's stuff that kind of you do to maintain community. But it's going to be like, I think, and it all starts as a source, right? It all starts from Google and what Google exposes, because it became the doorway to the internet. And so whatever decision it makes kind of rapidly changes the landscape of the internet, unless you go straight into the protected, walled gardens of the platform, like a Reddit, like a YouTube. I mean, even Instagram, if that's your thing. Although, I find social media sites are getting more and more themselves ruined by AI and too much advertising, and that's also admitting that, Instagram's advertising is actually really good. I think it works really well.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine in my lifetime that the rules of media just have changed so fundamentally, and the way that all of the constituents have kind of grabbed part of that spectrum has changed just so fundamentally. And I think that brings us back to why it's interesting to look at cases where, companies make media as a side hustle, and how, that's gone from being, cute to being like a real thing. And
yeah, I mean,
that's like an insurance company opening cafes. That's cute. But like A16 being a material podcast, creator is a real thing.
It's a real thing. And if you're in entertainment, right, which I think we all are, right, you're competing against, companies doing it for their own reasons. You're competing against an infinite number of people that are creating content for free that is then distributed for free. And all of that stuff's being completely opened up. And I think that the trend is not changing, and it's accelerating. And I actually think that what's happened to the open internet, because it was the most susceptible to I'm going to use the term infection. It doesn't have to be all bad, but kind of like this kind of, this kind of like viral propagation of, it kind of all became the same thing, and it all became SEO, and it all became AI generated because it's open. It's the easiest one to kind of like invade. But it's happening to social media platforms, and YouTube's been doing a good job at trying to fight it. I feel like the next one where we're going to see this are things like the App Store. I don't think we've even as the internet became more and more kind of unsightly and things started being put more and more behind paywalls, the App Store was also kind of like a safe place to move some of these things to, right? But now the same thing is going to happen there, where you can create infinite amount of apps, right? So the competition, the field becomes so busy that, like an aquarium, algae starts to grow and all the fish die at some point. And so we're really going to live in a world where the algorithms that filter the content become the most important thing. The reason YouTube is good is not because it has the best content, but because they do an incredibly good job at not showing you all the crap. And that's no longer what's happening on the open internet.
That's why the Netflix story, I think, is interesting to watch. And obviously the rules were always different for entertainment companies because, the investment in the product required, and the nature of the product required, made a completely different, monetization mechanism where you go directly to the consumer and you charge them a monthly fee for it, and it occupies an important part of their life and they pay for it. The question is, can a company sustain, how many companies can sustain that direct, flywheel in terms of owning the entire ecosystem that's delivered to the consumer in a way that allows them to create a great business. So that's what the entire Paramount Warner thing is about, is getting to the scale of IP and entertainment of investment to make that work. Netflix seemingly has done that, better than anyone else in terms of, creating that kind of environment. But, it's never as powerful as a model where, everybody participates in one ecosystem.
The thing is that I think there is, and I haven't completely defined what that is to me, but I think there is I was using the aquarium analogy, and, in an aquarium, you kind of have to adjust the pH levels and the temperature and stuff like that. there must be some sort of like level of like, what is the moat, right? And let me explain that. In the past, media used to have a massive moat, right? So you needed a lot of money, you need a lot of infrastructure. And so if you were creative, you needed to kind of get attached to somebody with the money and the infrastructure to print your magazine or make your movie and distribute it, or all these things like that, right? The internet changed that moat, but it still required, there was still a moat, right? You needed to put the work in, you needed to build a website, you needed to write stuff, you needed to code the website, set it up, databases and stuff like that. And I think at some point there was a perfect time where the internet had just enough of a moat where the people who cared enough would have to put enough effort into something, but not too much of a moat where it was only owned by the large corporations, right? And I think as technology does, it kind of started reducing that moat. And when the moat becomes essentially nothing, right? Then what you get is once again that aquarium becomes too unhealthy, because now everybody can do something, and therefore the value of everything gets lost. And I think what you're seeing is like maybe that's what we're kind of feeling now. Like the moat got destroyed completely. Somebody that just wants to put trash on the internet is going to beat out the person that doesn't, right?
Yeah.
And
we're about to hit a different set of pressures, because the moat, if it was kind of distribution before, now creation is becoming more accessible on the entertainment side to more and more people.
Of course.
And then what ends up happening is there's still value in talent and in IP, but they're able to kind of manage the extraction of that value outside of market or sort of industrial structures.
I think an excellent example of that, I think, is Pixar, which, was looked untouchable for so long. And there's such a great example of a massive moat, right? The compute needed, all the technical access.
The aggregation of talent.
The aggregation of talent, all of these things, right? And they just fired thousands of people because that moat is no longer there. They're competing against different things. Culture moves so fast, I think, these days that there's only, like, you need to be able to release things quicker. At the same time, culture gets quickly saturated. So if you overdo it, then people get tired and move on. So like there's a whole rebalancing of what that moat is, right? Like I think if you have a massive moat, like you're Nolan and you're showing your movie on like, and the only real way to see it is one of 41 cinemas across the world, that's a massive moat, right? And then there's the zero moat stuff, which is, your grandma sending you shrimp Jesus videos. And that's I think kind of like the framing as to how I look at things is like, where there are no moats, okay, and can we take advantage of that? Does it make some of that stuff easier? But where can we build our moat? Where do you build your moat? That's the question.
Yeah.
I believe the world is divided between main characters and supporting characters. There's the people who see the world as kind of like a first-person video game through their eyes, whatever. And then there's people who see the world like from above, and they see themselves interacting with the world, but they understand just by nature of their view that they are characters within a larger drama. Other people, the world revolves around them. We all know main characters. You might have a main character on the podcast or two. I don't know. I'm not a main character. Troy, I think you have main character energy. I think Alex can be a main character. Do you identify as a main character, Troy? Yeah,
No, I mean, I think I misunderstood, but
you wanted for us to unpack something about ego, and I connected ego to main characters and supporting characters, because main characters, typically the downfall of a main character tends to be ego.
I had an unconventional good product, and it had to do with what you're talking about, and it was a good product is, I think, a healthy ego, and mine isn't particularly healthy, so it's something I'm working on. So this is a moment of vulnerability for sure, Brian. But I don't know, I just kind of been feeling shit and doing some self-examination, and I noticed that I'm way too often in this kind of emotional fight or flight mode, and feeling kind of judged and comparing myself to other people, and And I think that's, you know, it's the mark of an ego that's kind of out of alignment. And, you know, when your identity's too rigid and you're worried about, you know, looking stupid or not successful, or, you know, nothing ever lasts because you're constantly building this kind of, you know, fragile, sick, hungry thing called an unhealthy ego. And I think when protecting it is your dominant concern, that, you know, you lose connection with people and relationships become transactional. And I just think when you know, your self-worth is conditional on some idea of success and you're always comparing yourself, that you have an unsatisfying life. So I was really interested in how you deal with that. What do you do? How, you know, I mean, obviously you go to therapy and you work on these kinds of things, but what kinds of behaviors do you remind yourself to engage in all the time to try to kind of manage that unhealthy energy? And, you know, whether it's compassion for other people or service or curiosity or just tolerating being a normal person, you know, being ordinary. And so I'm kind of trying to implement behavioral fixes for this, where there's ways that I can kind of nurse this sick ego that help me live a happier life. Does that feel foreign to you guys? So
No,
I'm sure you can relate, Alex.
I'd like Alex to take. Let me just give one like sort of thing. I think the behavioral fix is to actually remind yourself that nobody's actually thinking about you, and when they do, they just start to think about themselves then directly afterwards, and so it doesn't really matter. So you might as well do whatever you feel like is best for you.
That's the secret. And the fact that, I mean, everybody, hopefully, I think it's quite healthy to think that you're the number one most important person to yourself, you know, unless when you have kids. When you were saying this, Troy, two thoughts came to my head. And one was like, well, that guy that complained about us not sticking to the topics is going to lose his mind. And the other one was like, well, drugs. And the other one was, well, drugs, of course. It's interesting because it's very easy to get disjointed ego when you live part of your life on the internet. It's very easy to build up. It's very easy to break down. You get these weird little dopamine hits. You can be a hero for a day. Troy, you and I also had like really big jobs where people are very nice to you and sycophantic. And that's definitely appealing. That feels very nice. But yeah, I mean,
is that what it's like? Is it like going to the air like, you know, the Delta One lounge? Like, no wonder the boss class wants everyone back in the office.
I mean, that's why all these like people like Elon have lost their fucking mind, you know, because you don't have anybody around you at some point. If you're not careful, that calls you on your shit. So, I mean, I always felt that, like, for me, like, because I have a big ego. I am very ambitious. I have been successful, good at certain things that get rewarded in modern society. You know, I'm lucky. It's easy to let things get to your head. And I always felt, you know, like, hopefully you surround yourself with people who don't let that happen. And those are your real friends. But I think the internet's kind of broken some of that, because it doesn't make me feel good to be online too much, which is ironic considering that we record this podcast, both in ways that I think stroke my ego and also make me feel bad about myself. And I think that the solution is always to just spend more time with people who know me and who are honest with me, you know?
Well, your community and your family is a very big part of it, but I think there's also behavioral stuff that you can do that's pretty simple, you know, and just being able to kind of look at something objectively and say, what happened? How did the ego react? Was it useful? What are you doing? You know, to be wrong really quickly and admit it, to be able to turn things around and look at it from someone else's perspective. It's like my wife Jillian is just natively empathetic. Like, it's just part of her DNA. And I just could never understand it, because I would have thought that I was like that, but I'm not at all. And
but, you know,
so I have to work at it. And
yeah, but
it's like just little things, like doing things for people where you receive absolutely no credit. and just making this kind of like a part of your life. And I don't do enough of that, and I don't give enough for reasons that are just kind of not overtly transactional. And I think if I want to be happy in this next phase of my life, I have to get out of this kind of identity box that I had built for myself in the last chapter. And it's just kind of bearing down on me right now. So I have to, what are we doing on this podcast? Jesus.
I love it. You know what, Troy? I'm going to say this because I've worked with you. I do think that it changes. It changes with age and it changes with roles. And I think that your ability to be hard and difficult and act like you don't, that you're not being weighed down. And I mean this in a kind way, if you let me finish, by too much kind of empathy and compassion. It can also make you a great leader and get great things done. And I think, I don't want to mention Steve Jobs or things like that, because I actually think a lot of these people are jerks, but there is a balance with where you can use ego as a propulsive force to get things done, and where you're doing it because you believe in, any creative endeavor, right? You believe that the stupid idea you have in your head is important enough to put out into the world, let alone get, 10, 20, 100 people to follow you, right? You're the one that has to, shoot down somebody's work that they might have spent, the weekend working on. And I think to be able to turn that side off and to let your kind of your personal ambition, ego take the driver's seat is great. On the flip side, you have Andreessen saying, really quickly that he's never introspective, and that's that's being a maniac, right? But I think you need to modulate it, because if you don't come into an endeavor, like a creative endeavor, including this podcast or anything, we're working on, and saying this is worth people's time, right? Then nothing gets done. And so you need different people and you need to wear different hats. And I think ego can be undervalued sometimes.
The investigation.
That was pretty good.
I think so.
Yeah.
We apologize to everybody for the technical disruption. All right, Alex, great chatting, man.
All right. Love you. Bye.
That's it for this episode of People versus Algorithms, where each week we uncover patterns shaping media, culture, and technology. Big thanks, as always, to our producer, Vanya Arsenov. She always makes us a little clearer and more understandable, and we appreciate her very, very much. If you're enjoying these conversations, we'd love for you to leave us a review. It helps us get the word out and keeps our community growing. Remember, you can find People vs. Algorithms on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and now on YouTube. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next week.